a woman whom he could love well enough to wish to live with and marry had flitted across his mind, and the more that they chatted the more reasons kept suggesting themselves for thinking what might be folly in ordinary cases would not be folly in his. He must marry someone, that was already settled. He could not marry a lady, that was absurd. He must marry a poor woman. Yes, but a fallen one. Was he not fallen himself? Ellen would fall no more. He had only to look at her to be sure of this. He could not live with her in sin, not for more than the shortest time that could elapse before their marriage. He no longer believed in the supernatural element of Christianity, but the Christian morality at any rate was indisputable. Besides, they might have children, and a stigma would rest upon them. Whom had he to consult but himself now? His father and mother never need know, and even if they did, they should be thankful to see him married to any woman who would make him as happy as Ellen would. As for not being able to afford marriage, how did poor people do? Did not a good wife rather help matters than not? Where one could live, two could do so, and if Ellen was 3 or 4 years older than he was, well, what was that? Have you, gentle reader, ever loved at first sight? When you fell in love at first sight, how long, let me ask, did it take you to become ready to fling every other consideration to the winds, except that of obtaining possession of the loved one? Or rather, how long would it have taken you if you had had no father or mother, nothing to lose in the way of money, position, friends, professional advancement, or what not, and if the object of your affections was as free from all of these impedimenta as you were yourself? If you were a young John Stuart Mill, perhaps it would have taken you some time, but suppose your nature was quixotic, impulsive, altruistic, guileless. Suppose you were a hungry man starving for something to love and lean upon, for one whose burdens you might bear, and who might help you to bear yours. Suppose you were down on your luck, still stunned by a horrible shock, and this bright vista of a happy future floated suddenly before you. How long under these circumstances do you think you would reflect before you would decide on embracing what chance had thrown in your way? It did not take my hero long, for before he got past the ham and beef shop near the top of Fetter Lane, he had told Ellen that she must come home with him and live with him till they could get married, which they would do upon the first day that the law allowed. I think the devil must have chuckled and made tolerably sure of his game this time. Chapter 72. Ernest told Ellen of his difficulty about finding employment. "But what do you think of going into a shop for, my dear?" said Ellen. "Why not take a little shop yourself?" Ernest asked how much this would cost. Ellen told him that it might take a house in some small street, say near the Elephant and Castle, for 17 shillings or 18 shillings a week, and let off the top 2 floors for 10 shillings, keeping back the parlour and shop for themselves. If he could raise £5 or £6 to buy some second-hand clothes to stock the shop with, they could mend them and clean them, and she could look after the women's clothes while he did the men's. Then he could mend and make, if he could get the orders. They could soon make a business of £2 a week in this way. She had a friend who began like that, and had now moved to a better shop, where she made £5 or £6 a week at least, and she, Ellen, had done the greater part of the buying and selling herself. Here was a new light indeed. It was as though he had got his £5,000 back again all of a sudden, and perhaps ever so much more later on into the bargain. Ellen seemed more than ever to be his good genius. She went out and got a few rashers of bacon for his and her breakfast. She cooked them much more nicely than he had been able to do, and laid breakfast for him, and made coffee and some nice brown toast. Ernest had been his own cook and housemaid for the last few days, and had not given himself satisfaction. Here he suddenly found himself with someone to wait on him again. Not only had Ellen pointed out to him how he could earn a living when no one except himself had known how to advise him, but here she was so pretty and smiling, looking after even his comforts, and restoring him practically in all respects that he much cared about to the position which he had lost, or rather putting him in one that he had already liked much better. No wonder he was radiant when he came to explain his plans to me. He had some difficulty in telling all that had happened. He hesitated, blushed, hummed and hawed. Misgivings began to cross his mind when he found himself obliged to tell his story to someone else. He felt inclined to slur over things, but I wanted to get at the facts, so I helped him over the bad places, and questioned him till I had got out pretty nearly the whole story as I have given it above. I hope I did not show it, but I was very angry. I had begun to like Ernest. I don't know why, but I have never heard that any young man to whom I had become attached was going to get married without hating his intended instinctively, though I had never seen her. I have observed that most bachelors feel the same thing, though we are generally at some pains to hide the fact. Perhaps it is because we know we ought to have got married ourselves. Ordinarily we say we are delighted. In the present case I did not feel obliged to do this, though I made an effort to conceal my vexation. That a young man of so much promise, who was heir also to what was now a handsome fortune, should fling himself away upon such a person as Ellen was quite too provoking, and the more so because of the unexpectedness of the whole affair. I begged him not to marry Ellen yet, not at least until he had known her for a longer time. He would not hear of it. He had given his word, and if he had not given it, he should go and give it at once. I had hitherto found him upon most matters singularly docile and easy to manage, but on this point I could do nothing with him. His recent victory over his father and mother had increased his strength, and I was nowhere. I would have told him of his true position, but I knew very well that this would only make him more bent on having his own way, for with so much money why should he not please himself? I said nothing, therefore, on this head, and yet all that I could urge went for very little with one who believed himself to be an artisan or nothing. Really, from his own standpoint, there was nothing very outrageous in what he was doing. He had known and been fond of Ellen years before. He knew her to come of respectable people, and to have been born a good character, and to have been universally liked at Battersby. She was then a quick, smart, hard-working girl, and a very pretty one. When at last they met again she was on her best behaviour. In fact, she was modesty and demureness itself. What wonder, then, that his imagination should fail to realize the changes that 8 years must have worked? He knew too much against himself, and was too bankrupt in love to be squeamish. If Ellen had been only what he thought her, and if his prospects had been in reality no better than he believed they were, I do not know that there is anything much more imprudent in what Ernest proposed than there is in half the marriages that take place every day. There was nothing for it, however, but to make the best of the inevitable, so I wished my young friend good fortune, and told him he could have whatever money he wanted to start his shop with, if what he had in hand was not sufficient. He thanked me, asked me to be kind enough to let him do all my mending and repairing, and to get him any other like orders that I could, and left me to my own reflections. I was even more angry when he was gone than I had been while he was with me. His frank, boyish face had beamed with a happiness that rarely visited it. Except at Cambridge he had hardly known what happiness